Okay, I said it was a world record, and so it's nice to have everyone here. The flow of the webinar, I'm going to talk first about what got us interested in this topic. And by definition, it would seem because of so many people joining, it interests you as well. So why did we get excited about this topic of safety leadership? And what did we do about it? So I'll talk about that to start with. Then I'll hand over to Sean to say what it was that we found when we started looking at this. And then we're going to finish off with Rachel. She's going to take us through quite a basic case study, but it shows you how powerful some of these concepts are. Okay, next slide. So why is this so interesting to people? And I think it's, we were talking, and we think it's because safety is so visible. Everybody wants a piece of safety. And if you go back to Haslow's hierarchy of needs, think about we need warmth, we need shelter, we need food, water. Safety, security is pretty high up there. So safety is it's a human expectation. When we started looking at this, we actually started to get a little bit of a shock, because if you have a safety problem, by definition, you've got a people problem. People are doing not what they're supposed to be doing. And therefore, if you have a people problem, you have a leadership problem. And guess who the problem is? I know a lot of people on this call, and you are all line leaders in positions of responsibility. If we've got a leadership problem, we are the problem. And therefore, to jump into a conclusion, one of the takeaways from today is people can change, people do change, but they will only change when you change. Okay. Next slide, please, Rachel. I've shown on here, if I look around this virtual room, and I do have privilege to know a lot of you, we've got a lot of experienced people. You are not starting out on your careers. You are well through, very experienced, mature people. And I'm sure a lot of you will recognize this Bradley safety curve came from DuPont. DuPont dominated safety thinking for a while, and they came up with this concept. And we can plot ourselves, whichever organization we work for, on this curve. And obviously it goes from being quite reactive and not very good, and you're having lots of incidents, onto a rarely reached place is stage 4, where typically you've got things like 1 million hours LTA free reporting incident rate. You've got very low levels of incidents. You've got a lot of commitment from the entire workforce to get it right. So you can see the curve is asymptotic. It's actually quite easy to get some movement early on, particularly if you're bad, by doing certain things. And so what got us excited, what we were talking about over a coffee one day, was how do you get to that stage 4? Because so many people rarely achieve, everybody wants it, you rarely achieve that position. I was quite lucky in my career. I was an operations director, and I had sites around the world. A lot of my friends and colleagues are on the call today from those parts, in China, in India, in America, in Europe. And I was very lucky, as were my colleagues who are going to talk to you shortly. We had tens of thousands of pounds spent on our training and development, and a lot of it on safety. And it was still rare. It was the odd site that maybe temporarily got to stage 4. It's an incredibly difficult nut to crack. And this is what we started to talk about. So who are we this afternoon? We've got myself, my background is I'm a naval architect. Then I moved from the shipbuilding industry, where I had 10 years, into the chemical industry and petrochemicals. And as I've said, I had various line manager positions, culminating as a global ops director. I'm joined by Sean, who by function is a chemist a long time ago, But Sean progressed through the ranks in pharmaceuticals and specialty chemicals, and Sean was a general manager prior to joining us as a legitimate leadership consultant last year. Rachael is a mechanical engineer, Cambridge University, a fellow of the Institute of Mechanical Engineers. I worked with Rachael a long time. She did put a lot of focus on process safety. She is a trained HAZOP leader, and she's got a lot of experience in large capital project management. So that's our team. And what we were talking about is, what is the difference? How do you get out of quadrant 2 and 3 into quadrant 4? So it was literally a conversation over a coffee, and we were genuinely interested is what, and Rachel's obviously got a lot of the toolage with the things like the HAZOP, the risk assessments. And we said, was it the tools? Was it the procedures? Was it the processes? Was it SOP, standing up written, or was it training? And of course, it's all of those. Of course, those things make a difference. And even to the point where they're mandatory, like anybody who's half decent does those things. But it's not enough. That doesn't get you right to the tip of that curve. And going back to my statement, this is about people. You don't get people engaged with beanbags and football tables in the canteen, right? Yes, those things can help, but it's not the killer thing that makes the difference. So we kept talking and we kept talking. We said, right, it's not those things. It's not all the tools. It's not the beanbags. It's not a nice canteen. We concluded it was leadership. But then we said, what kind of leadership? And we said, yes, we've got a fair bit of experience between us, but why don't we go and ask a lot of our contacts out there in the world? And luckily, we know a lot of CEOs, MDs, ops directors, EHS professionals, even EHS regulators, ex-factory inspectors we consulted. And the question we asked them was, who do you know who's reached that stage 4 level of culture and performance? And literally the best of the best. And the way that we solicited the information from them was to say, tell us about the bad people, tell us about the mediocre people, and tell us about these people who really do stand out. What's the difference? So that's what we did. We interviewed all of those people. We ended up with 150 different reference cases to draw on. And we did, and that all of that endorsed, it wasn't about the tools or the processes, it was about leadership. And when we summated what was the big message? The difference was intent. And by intent, we mean effectively, because this is about people, as a leader, am I more interested in me and my career and having a decent score on the scoreboard in terms of profit or profitability or safety? We're all measured on safety. So am I more interested about me looking good in my career, or am I more interested, genuinely, properly interested in you? And that's what came across. Intent, if you go next slide. Our definition of intent is it's about motive. As leaders, people are looking at us all day, every day. That you are never off duty. They're watching for what you do. They're watching for what you don't do. They're watching for what you say, what you don't say. You are constantly being tested 1,000 times a day about where your mind is, where your thinking is. What's your motive? Why are you asking me to do this? And what we found is, obviously, lots of research that we did on this. In any human interaction, we judge the other person by as we perceive their intent. And what we found out, the people who are the best of the best, people will go the extra mile for those people because they are convinced that those people have their best interests at heart. Okay, so that's what we found. I'm going to hand over to, and that's how we did it. I'm going to hand over to Sean. He's going to tell you, we've codified this into hopefully some useful toolage for you. I'm going to hand over to Sean to take us through that.
Thanks, Tony, and hello, everybody. Thanks very much for joining us today. I'm going to crack straight on with this and talk about what does that intent come across as? It's the intent to give to the other person in that relationship. And in our model, the criteria for excellence is the degree to which the leader is prepared to care for and grow the people in their charge. It's almost to treat their people as human beings rather than human resources, developing genuinely deep relationships where they're capable of understanding that the knowledge, the skills and experience of a person are wrapped up in a complex, unique human being. And we must remember that we were human beings a long time before we were considered human resources. The leader's then able to help enable their people to become the absolute best version of themselves possible. Their focus is on using the job to grow the person. Therefore, the product of exceptional leadership is exceptional people. So with that in mind, the interviews that we conducted, they highlighted 28 behaviors that separated the best from the rest, the difference that makes the difference. And we place these behaviors within our known enablers of trust, the degree to which the leader is prepared to care for and grow their people. And growth in our world is another word for empowerment. And we break that further down into means, ability, and accountability. We call this the empowerment framework. But in other words, in order to grow someone, you must first care for them genuinely. You then need to provide the means and ability for them to contribute. And you must do the hardest thing of all, which is hold them to high standards of accountability. So how do the very best leaders generate an environment where their people are convinced that they care deeply about the safety agenda? Well, they do these 7 things. I'm going to pull a couple of them out to talk about. And the first one that I want to pull out is the very best leaders. They put people's safety first over results every single time, no matter the pressure to deliver. And I was told some absolutely brilliant stories during the interview process. And this one example I want to tell you about really sticks in my mind. It was about a gentleman who was, this is 30 years ago, and he was the manager of the world's biggest ethylene plant up in Teesside. Long story short, a large oil company had just opened up a gas field and they wanted to change the feedstock to the cracker. So from their onshore facility, they direct drilled underneath a river. And when they went underneath the river, the drilling process went slightly awry and the pipeline rose in the wrong place. And it dislodged the earth underneath the feedstock pipeline that was already there and the product pipeline out of the ethylene plant, leaving both of them hanging 100 meters in the air. Now, this guy drove the 2.5, 3 miles to the incident with the person I interviewed and immediately ceased the drilling operation and shut down the ethylene plant. And they did that for an entire week under immense pressure from both the internal stakeholders and the oil company to recommence works. Just to give you an idea, 30 years ago, that ethylene plant made £2 million profit a week, which in today's money is borderline £1 million a day. That person wasn't prepared to put that profit before the well-being, the health and safety of people and the environment. I can only imagine what a strong message that sent out, but considering that I interviewed this person 30 years later and they still talked about this example as having a profound impact on them, that manager at the time told everybody around him what he stood for, were those actions. The second thing I want to talk about under the care section, and this one is about the best leaders. They care deeply and personally about their people's well-being. And I want to put a bit of a personal spin on this one, because I was told a lot of amazing stories and some of them are very personal, but I can't tell you the amount of times I've personally been told to leave the job at the door. And actually, for the most part, that's extremely sage advice. The truth is, I don't think it's actually that it's possible when you're responsible for people. You are constantly concerned for their well-being. And this process really made it clear to me that, yes, I did care if the plan or the revenue targets weren't met. Of course I did, but I could leave that at the door. And I realized through this process that it was actually the right thing to take home that feeling of responsibility and almost chronic unease about the health and safety and the well-being of your people. It should be personal. And on reflection, this interview process really made me understand that. So that's care, and that's the precondition for growth. The next thing a leader has to do is provide their people with the means which allows them to contribute to the safety agenda. Now, the very best leaders, they make a conscious effort to bring clarity to every single tier in the organization. And that's the next point that I want to talk about. They ensure that people's unique contribution to safety is clear at every single level, and that's what people are held accountable for. Now, this is actually relatively straightforward when it comes to the front line. It's wear the right PPE, follow the standard operating processes, go to your training, etc., etc. But it gets much more diffuse as you go up the hierarchy. You either get little or no contribution, or you get several people trying to attack the same things, and then you end up confusing the issue. This is much more than just attending a safety stand down once a month, where the poor people that are nearest the office block get attacked by a legion of leaders at the end of the month so they can all tick the box to say they've done their walks. This is about having meaningful, proactive conversations with people about what you can do uniquely to move the conversation forward and improve the safety of the organization. The second one that I want to talk about in means, and this came out so strongly in all of the interviews that we conducted. It made it abundantly clear that the best leaders believe in the safety management system. It's not a sideshow to them. They either build it from scratch or they build on whatever they have. It's not a passive structure that they have to use. They take the time to understand it and they improve it. And the key thing that came out was their ability to use EHS exceptions, positive or negative ones, as learning experiences to build on the corporate knowledge. They embed those learnings back into the safety management system, thereby raising up the knowledge of everyone in the organization. This is actually quite a lot talked about. I'm sure you've all heard about this sort of thing in the past. It's very hard to do with regularity, and the very best managers take the time to do this. They manage their knowledge well, and they almost have a pathological dislike of having to learn the same thing twice. The final one it means that I want to talk about, because standards are really very much prevalent in our model and something that we all talk about a lot. But it's this sense of being happily discontented. We never rest on our laurels. We're always moving forward. The very best of the best, they continually raise the bar on safety by challenging us to be better than we were before. They look at every situation as an opportunity to improve. And the best story that came out of this was one of a senior leader who'd started a new role in a factory that manufactured rockets. And part of the process of this manufacturing facility for 30 years had been to drill a hole in the solid fuel propellant. And he was aghast when he saw this part of the process step, and he challenged them and he said, well, why are we doing this? And they said, well, we've never had a serious incident before. And he said, please find another way of doing it. What do you need to do this? And the answer very classically came back and said, well, there isn't another way. And he replied, find one. And they did. They formed the propellant around a die, thus creating the desired orifice to fit this device in. And this story isn't about throwing your weight around in a new job and sort of pretending or giving people the idea that you're super interested in safety. What that person did was tell people, if you can find a better way of doing this, we'll support you. And that sends out another very strong message, because it might have been 30 years without an incident, but maybe it wouldn't have been 31. Then I want to go on to the ability section. Ability is ensuring people can contribute to the safety agenda. The very best leaders instill confidence in all that we're prepared for anything through rigorous audits and drills. It's fairly standard in my experience for most leaders to be proficient in their responsibilities when it comes to major audits or drills such as a fire evacuation process. But the very best take it much further than that. They value audits as learning opportunities internally and externally. They almost develop personal relationships with the regulators, and they turn their attention to much more than just the fire evacuation. There's major incident response, rescue from height, rescue from confined spaces, what you do in the presence of a chemical leak, etc. Whatever the holistic scope of the risk is, they put time in the diary and they ensure the relevant people are empowered to learn their roles. And this links back to the safety management system piece, because they use the risk register, they use the business continuity plans, they ensure they're prepared as reasonably possible. And because they're taking time out of people's diaries to do this stuff, it sends out a very strong message to the organization, not just that people are prepared, but that we take this stuff seriously. Okay. And the other bit here in ability is that this is a particular skill that the top leaders have got. And I originally called this leadership paradoxes. Thanks, Christian, if you're on the call. But we turned it to trade-offs in the end. So the best leaders are appreciate and able to deal with trade-offs, such as accountability versus good relationships and safety versus output. They're paradoxical because they appear to be mutually exclusive. You can't have one without the other. But the absolute best understand that they are in fact symbiotic. You can't have good output without good safety. And almost confusingly, you absolutely cannot have good relations without high levels of accountability. And this understanding, this came through the interview process. This skill normally comes through experience and therefore confidence. It's a long-term view of the organization that they have. They resist the urge to react to every situation. They're able to see consequence and outcome, and it's hugely important. So they're happy to stop production now to fix this plant in order to get better production in the future. It can feel like spinning plates at times, but the best leaders have got the courage of their convictions to see it through. Right, finally, I'd like to go on to the accountability section. Now, accountability in our world is engaging people's willingness to contribute to the safety agenda. And this is about creating a culture where not only people are held to account, but more importantly, in our view, one where individuals take personal accountability for their own actions, for the things that are within their control. And this is really where the rubber meets the road. Accountability is about positive and constructive consequences based on the choices that people make. And we have to understand a world without consequences, chaos. The very best don't jump to conclusions when they're about to hold someone to account. They find out why, and they do that by deciding, was this a means issue? Was this safety exception an ability issue? Or actually, was this a matter of individual choice? Now, this is a first step to creating a culture of fairness. Individuals and teams are not credited with work they haven't contributed to. And crucially, individuals and teams are not censured when what happened wasn't within their remit to control. This is what we call the golden rule of accountability. You always ask why. And then the last one I want to talk about in accountability, and I genuinely feel this is maybe the most important one of them all, is that those leaders that excel at creating an excellent safety culture cultivate an environment where safety carelessness is never, bold and underlined, ignored, and people are appropriately censured. Because the standard you walk past is the standard that you accept. If you walk past careless, at your peril. And I'm not talking about this once a month when you're on a prescribed safety walk. I'm talking about the first thing on a grey Monday morning after you've been on holiday for 2 weeks. From the moment you get out of your car to the moment you get back into your car and beyond, in all honesty, the world is watching. Every single action you take is being interpreted. And when you walk past careless, the interpretation from others is that you don't care. The game is won and lost here. Are you prepared to do the right thing every single time? But it's actually a bit more than that, because we've met lots of individuals who are capable of this, and they are fantastic leaders. However, if you want to change a culture, You need to get 80% or more of the leaders in your organization doing this. Careless is never ignored. Individuals are given the license to act, and they have the confidence and courage to do so. And if, like me, you believe in a leader-leader culture, then the ultimate game is that this characteristic extends beyond those who are people leaders, but to every single person in the organization. But in our view, it starts and stops with the leadership team. So we like to think of accountability as a privilege. You're not given the right to demand high standards of other people. It doesn't come with a job title or a paycheck. You've got to earn it every single day, and it's earned through firstly providing care, then you provide the means and ability, and when you get to the top of those steps, you're in a privileged position to help people mature and act according to value, to do the right thing even when no one's watching. It's not a linear process. At any particular point in time, you're at any particular stage with any number of people. What this framework allows for is knowing where you are on this map, ensure that most often than not, you make the appropriate leadership response to the situations that are presented to you on a daily basis. Now, I want to hand over to Rachel now, who's going to talk about the empowerment framework in a little bit more detail. And then she's going to take you through an example of how to apply it, a real life example, so you can get a feel for how this map, or this compass, as she calls it, is used.
Thank you very much, Sean. So the leaders that we interviewed, when they talked about excellence, they had specific people in mind. Why was it that they formed these conclusions about these people? It can be because of the big examples that Sean described, but also, as Tony said, it's getting the small things right day after day, over and over. And as Sean said, this empowerment framework is a compass to assist us to do with this, because as we said, we're on show all the time and we need to be getting this right. So I'm going to take you through our framework with the perspective of safety to illustrate it. So what we're talking about here is contribution. What we're here to do is to enable people to maximize the give that they can make to create a safer environment around them. In terms of means, I think time is such a critical issue. It's very rare that the right way to do something is also the most expedient. You know, it's going to be quicker to change a light bulb by standing on a chair than going and getting a step ladder. So we need to give people time to plan and assess, time to engage with the detail, time to close out actions. We all have to spend time on safety. You know, how do we interpret whether something is important? It's what people are willing to spend their time on. In terms of environment, we know that there are elements that affect people's human reliability. We talk about things like noise, light, distraction, dust as performance influencing factors when we look at safety critical tasks. You know, these performance influencing factors clearly sit within the environment. In terms of authority, controls are always going to have a place in safety. But setting them at the right level, giving people appropriate authority, is what makes the difference between these controls being empowering, as creating a safe space in which to operate, or disempowering. Standards are a key enabler of safety. How can I deliver excellence if I have no clarity on what it looks like? And clearly, having an enabling safety management system is a really important means issue. But I hope when you see it in the context of this framework, you know, we understand why a safety management system alone is not going to deliver what we're looking for. It's not going to push us to that asymptotic part of the Bradley curve. In terms of ability, you know-how is all about managing competence at an individual and an organisational level. Understanding the skills that are required, having matrices, training plans, succession plans, all part of know-how. But this is only part of ability. Know why is such a key ingredient. Now, I need to understand the hazards, but I also need to understand why the things I do contribute to managing their risk. Know why is enabling. It provides me with purpose. When I understand why, the the routine, potentially boring maintenance task of closing out work orders on the CMMS system is transformed into recognising I have a key contribution to make in managing the integrity of critical plant. When people have the means and the ability, we must hold them accountable. The alternative to not being willing to hold people, if we're not willing to hold people accountable, is that we'll have to resort to controls. And inevitably, these controls will be set at the point of the lowest common denominator. They'll tie up the willing and disempower them. For someone to demonstrate that they're trustworthy, we first have to trust them. And accountability is what we should expect in return. And what is it we're holding people accountable for? Not for results. People are not in control of results, but making their contribution to a standard. We've evolved our thinking in safety to recognise that safety is not the absence of accidents, but the presence of controls. So as leaders, we need to be out there catching people doing things right and positively enforcing that, saying thank you, rewarding people. But equally, we have to deal with failure to contribute to the right standard. These are the kind of behaviours that are going to lead to incidents or erode the safety barriers that we have in place. And as Tony said, you know, it's all about repeatedly getting this right over and over. Careless and careful, we're unlikely to find them from the confines of our office. So, you know, we've talked about this as a compass, so I think it's helpful to try and explore this through a worked example, and have something here that I've distilled down from a real example that was told to me. So this was told to me by someone who was a highly respected manager in this organisation, who was very dismayed about the way it was handled. So it was out in the public domain, where a key piece of infrastructure was inconveniencing the general public. There was no incident, no accident, nothing untoward happened. However, a member of the general public filmed the activity and posted it to social media. When they examined the footage, they could see that not only were not all the team wearing the appropriate PPE, but the piece of plant equipment being used was not the one specified in the standard job method. So the team leader was interviewed. He's the guy who had planned and supervised the work. And he explained how he'd been told that the work must happen by Friday. And it wasn't strictly said, but he said it very much or else hung in the air. And his experience in this organisation, sadly, that arguing was not going to get you very far. So when the right piece of equipment wasn't available, he did his best planning around the next closest piece of equipment. So what does the framework tell us about what we should do here? So we're back to the golden rule that Sean talked about. We mustn't jump to conclusions. The object of this exercise is to learn, to make the appropriate fair response, and to try and do better next time. And if we're going to be fair to this team leader that we're investigating, we need to get specific. And I think there are some issues to break out here. So I think we need to treat the issue of PPE and the issue of plant as separate. So let's start with PPE. You might have your suspicions, and perhaps I've proved you correct. When they investigated, yes, the team did indeed have the means and the ability. They knew what equipment they were supposed to be wearing. It was available to them. So it's entirely right that the team leader be held accountable, both for wearing his own PPE and for ensuring that the team who he's supervising are wearing theirs. If this was a once-off, I would say, you know, I will be looking at a strong censure here. This is not acceptable. It must not happen again. And actually, if you have good people, and this guy was by all accounts a good person, you know, they put their hands up, they accept it, they understand, and you know, they personally do want to do better next time. Repeated carelessness is deliberate. That would warrant a stronger response. But should we stop there? Remember, this person sits in a hierarchy. And it's been our experience that whenever there's an exception, there's always something to learn about what's going on up and down the line. You know, I would be asking myself, you know, is this a one-off, or is this symptomatic of a general lack of adherence? The team leader worked for a maintenance manager. What's this person's role and what are they doing? Is this person present? Are they aware? Do they know what the standard of adherence to the PPE is like? Are they setting the standard? Are they responding to positive and negative compliance? What about the maintenance manager, who is the area manager? Is this person a role model? Are they setting the standard for the organisation? Are they having conversations about PPE? Are they ensuring that there's consistency? You will only be experienced as fair if a transgression in one part of the organisation is treated exactly the same wherever it occurs. You know, I think a really good litmus test here would be, you know, are seniors at the level of the area manager able to go out onto the front line, and would they challenge people if they saw that standards were not being met? Even better, what about if the roles were reversed? Do the people on the front line feel empowered to challenge senior people who are not meeting the organisational standards? So that's the PPE. If we want to look at the plant, we need to wipe the slate clean. It's a separate issue. Did the team leader have the means? I don't think so. And the person I know didn't think so either. You know, the timescales and the availability of the kit were just not consistent with one another. The person didn't have the means. Now, I would say that the team leader should be accountable for raising the fact that they have an issue. But I think, as we've established, that was a problem in this organisation. Who is accountable for providing the means to the team leader? It's the maintenance manager. You know, and if they have control over the timescales and the equipment, they should be held accountable. But sadly, in this organisation, they had no control either. They hadn't set these demands. And in fact, they also had a means issue. It was the area manager who failed in their accountability of enabling the leader beneath him. So before I tell you what actually happened, I think this is a very relevant question. You know, when it comes to accountability, where do we tend to focus our attention when exceptions occur? I would posit to you that it's at the front, we overly focus on the front line. And in this situation, that is exactly what happened. The team leader was held fully accountable for all the failings and given the strongest possible sanction short of dismissal. Meanwhile, his seniors looked in the mirror and congratulated themselves that they had shown that they were tough on safety. Which I think begs another question. If we really want to change organisations, where are we best focusing? I would suggest that it's senior levels. And in this organisation, at senior levels, absolutely nothing changed, which is why I can be near 100% sure that if the same situation presented itself on another day with a different person, exactly the same would happen. The senior leaders didn't take responsibility for changing anything. They didn't show that they cared for the front line, who are actually the people who are at risk. And they sent a message, and it was the wrong message. That's the message that we're not prepared to put safety first. And if they're not prepared to put safety first, why would they expect anyone else to? This actually ended up being one of the final nails in the coffin for the person I know, and they left the organisation shortly after. You know, this to me is what dysfunction looks like. And then if we say, what does health look like? You know, we know this because it's where we started. Health in this situation would look like a team leader who has everything that they need in order to be able to do the job properly, and the knowledge that they can raise concerns and they'll be supported up the line. It's a manager who's providing what they need to their teams, who's present, and who's using this framework to hold people to account positively and negatively. It's an area manager who's making sure that the organisation is equipped, so cultivating an approach of fairness and accountability amongst the people who work for them. You know, Sean said, when you need to get to a significant number of people all doing this, and then you start to see the change. The senior leaders demonstrating that they would resist the pressure to move on in the face of safety concerns. It brings us right back to the very first criteria that Sean talked about, the kind of example that people remember for the rest of their career. So I hope that was a helpful little scoot through the empowerment framework. And I'm going to hand back over to Tony. Thank you very much for your time.
Brilliant, Rachel. Thanks. And to Sean. Rachel, great example of there is a safety issue with people at the front end. If you have a people issue, you have a leadership issue. Great example. Thank you. I'm just going to give you, so you've heard about what got us interested, you've heard about what we found, and you've heard about how to use it. Sean didn't cover by any means all of the 28 things that we codified. He did 5 or 6, so thanks for that, Sean. Obviously, we will be giving you a copy of this to take away. I just want to leave you with 3 thoughts to wrap up. The first one is, and I know, because I do know a lot of you, and I do know you're good people who do a lot of good stuff. I bet you're sitting there saying, oh, well, Sean showed me number 5. I do that. I do regular drills. I go and watch the game. And you do. I've had the privilege of working with you, and I know you do. The point is, the best of the best do all of these all the time. Any one of those 28 things on their own, none of those 28 things are game-changing blockbusters. The point is, the best of the best do these things, all of them, all of the time. And, as John's intimated, they insist that that's what their team do as well. So that's the first takeaway. Individually, they're easy. Collectively, it's hard work. Number 2, this is about line managers. It is about leadership. This is not, nowhere today are we talking about EHS professionals, EHS function. This is the line. It goes back to that. If you've got a people problem, you've got a leadership problem, you are the leader. But you've heard the word compass 2 or 3 times today. I think it's this, you're not on your own. So yes, it is down to you, but you're not on your own. Hopefully this framework does give you a bit of guidance, because I found when I was out there doing the job, you get faced with something, and I found the framework that Rachel described a really powerful diagnostic tool. Because if something has happened and it is a high pressure situation, typically in my mind, I had a little devil on this shoulder that was saying, take the shortcut, Tony, do the expedient thing, just cover it up, just squash it. Censure someone to look good and then move on, right? The angel, on the other hand, is saying, hang on, what really happened here? Let's do a diet. Was it a means issue? Was it an ability issue? Was it a willingness issue? Was it them, or actually was it me? So I found a really powerful diagnostic tool, but it is down to you, and which way you go with it is down to your moral compass. Last thing I want to say is this doesn't come cheap. It is, my words there, it's a relentless hard grind until it becomes instinctive. And the currency, you've heard with the examples, it's about time, investing your time. Those 28 things are all doable, but they absolutely mop up your time. So the currency is not money, it's time spent with your focus on how you can empower that individually and organizationally. I think is also what came out of Rachel's example. But it's when you get to that hallowed ground of stage 4, it doesn't feel good. And when you do get there, it means not only have you got safety right, you are going to be in a high performing team. There will be not only smashing safety, they'll be absolutely hitting quality, they'll be hitting productivity, they will be making money for the business. So good safety is good business, and you know that. Right, so that's my takeaways. Individually, no blockbusters, but do them all the time. It is down to you, and you must put the effort in. We did talk long and hard about whether we should give you these slides, because we've put a lot of effort into this. We think, codified what makes the difference. There are 28 things. We've only covered 5 or 6. We are going to give it to you. There is the concept of responsible care in safety, where one industry helps another. So we are going to put them out there. That will tell you what to do. We haven't necessarily said how to do it. So the gift to you is, there it is. There's the code for what makes a difference. Where we'd like to continue talking to you is how to do it. And we've got some methodology on how to do that as well. But that's the end of our formal input. I'm going to stop the recording there and open up to questions. Thanks to Rachel and Sean.